You're like,
It's okay. Doesn't have to be that perfect.
that could be a mirror image.
Yes, a mirror image, just the other way around.
Yeah, but you can actually tell that. I'm pretty sure you can do it from here. Turn it on and that will come straight.
It's the way this is set up.
Set up.
It's 2 minutes, so it doesn't hold on it. It doesn't.
I don't know, I'm checking.
Sorry, one sorry. Yeah, I am. You here? Okay, sorry.
2 people now.
Turn the mic.
Huh?
It's got built in.
So right now it's going to
It's just us, chef.
I know. You know, I was wondering. Okay. You know, I was wondering if we should have cancelled today because it's
Yeah.
because it's the school holidays.
Can you mention it for next week?
And then it was too late.
It's the Monday.
Is next week is Monday? Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should cancel. Even today's going to be difficult. We'll see. All right. So, give me a couple of minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Could you do me a favor? What's your friend? I'm not going to leave.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to go soon as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah. You want to put it in?
From there to Hawaii, I have to just
Yeah.
yeah,
I'll move it.
leave the keys in the church.
You got the number.
Huh?
Just press the end screen.
You want to finish? Is it already streaming?
Yeah, yeah. Just need to click here.
All right. No.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. 2 minutes.
So I'm just sending messages out to people then.
All right, somebody's trying to fix his handle. Yeah.
Someone come. Bit late today.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm joking.
Straight down.
That's the whole reason I have to be out.
All right, let me just. There, yeah.
Yeah, so literally just click that and that's just leave it and move it.
Okay.
Just Just on that one.
Yeah. Okay.
Just remind about next week, you said, yeah.
So no
No halaqah next
you know what the students come back?
next week.
Tuesday, then. That means the kids go back to school on Tuesday as well.
Yeah.
It's my first holiday in a long time. I'm spending like all of it with the kids. That's all right, no problem. I'm just going to start. I know a lot of people haven't turned up today, but it's best to get started with this. That was it. Why you missed it? Why did you think there might not be? Yeah, I thought about that. I did kind of think about it, and I thought maybe. Yeah, then I thought, well, I suppose. I didn't think everybody, because I thought quite a lot of people in the halaqah weren't necessarily. Is everybody like a halaqah student? I don't think they are. Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله تعالى وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى اله وصحبه اجمعين اما بعد. So the last sentence that we were on last week, inshallah, was وَعَلَمْ أَنَّ الْمُؤْمِنَ يُخْتَبَرُ صِدْقُهُ فِي كُلِّ حَالٍ. I remember discussing that bit, but I don't remember discussing the next part. That know that the believer, his truthfulness is tested in every circumstance. مُطَّلَبٌ نَفْسُهُ بِالْبَلْوَى, and that test and trial is demanded of himself. رَقِيبٌ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ, and another quality of the believer is that he is always self-aware. The word raqib is also used as one of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it implies Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's watchfulness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is close to us and He watches us all the time. So in that, the angels are described as raqibun atid. The angels that observe our actions are also described as raqib. So therefore, it's just about being watchful and observant of one's actions. So the quality of the believer is he is raqibun lillahi ala nafsi. He is, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, constantly watchful over himself. فَاثْبُتْ عَلَى مَحَجَّةِ الْحَقِّ فَإِنَّكَ مُرَادُ الْعَوْنِ, and therefore stay steadfast upon the way of truth, because you are muradul aun. So you're intended to be. It is intended for you to be assisted, meaning that if you can attain these qualities, then you will always receive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help and assistance. One thing about these sentences is that it's basically saying that we're in a constant state of trial against our own self, against our own urges, against our own. There'll always be little situations that will put our truthfulness, our awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's watchfulness. There'll be little trials that will bring certain our morality, certain akhlaq and attributes into question or put them under scrutiny or into trial. And this is going to be a constant, it's going to be a constant in life. So the idea of staying on the path, or staying steadfast on the path, is basically to be mindful enough to recognize when we're being tested and when we're being tried, and try to overcome those. And the path is therefore essentially the path of a path of struggle against ourselves, right? Against our nafs. So, and it's not. I mean, whenever we think about trials, we often assume that every single that trials are big things, right? But it's actually big things do get thrown at us, and that's when tests are thrown, and that's when people are tested in a big way. And sometimes people can find the resolve to overcome a major trial, but we have to also recognize that when it comes to the bigger picture of life, trials are it's like death by 1,000 cuts. There are lots and lots and lots of little trials that people constantly fail, partly because they don't think much of it, right? A little lie here, a little diva there, but these are all part of that. These are all little skirmishes against our own selves and the shaitan, and these things do matter. And most importantly, a lack of awareness of them, a lack of watchfulness over ourselves and over our nafs, is probably the bigger problem than the individual issues themselves. Because let's just say something. I mean, if it's a major sin, it requires tawbah. So not being aware that a person has committed a major sin is a problem, because they won't repent. You won't repent if you're not mindful enough, if you're not watchful enough over yourself to even realize that you've committed 5 major sins in the day, right? So there will be no tawbah, and tawbah will always be vague, right? And inshallah, we hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept it, even if you make a vague tawbah. Allah, I repent from you for any sin that I have committed, right? That's a general and vague tawbah, which inshallah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept. And the fact that and it's still a great achievement to actually be making that tawbah. But not everybody has the habit, not everybody will do it. And tawbahs can become just words that we don't mean and we don't think about. So therefore, there is this, there's a probability, actually, strong probability, that people are constantly committing major sins without being aware of them. And that lack of awareness is the fundamental problem. Not that we're committing sins, because sins are committed by everyone. Minor sins are, there is this thing about minor sins, that if a person also has a habit of doing a lot of good, then minor sins are taken care of by themselves. Because you can do a minor sin, you can commit a minor sin, but then follow up and do something good, and the good eliminates the minor sin as well as its effect. But again, if we're not mindful, and if we're not watchful and observant of what we're up to and what we're doing, and we have no sense of self evaluation and accountability, then we don't know where our account lies, right? And that's pretty much the story of our lives, right? We'll do good, we'll do bad, but one will outweigh the other at the end of the day. I was just I was listening to a lecture about the akhirah, and there's an interesting way in which the speaker put it, which is that on the day of judgment, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala weighs deeds, right, and takes us to account and weighs deeds and so on, that it seems to not make sense that a 60, 70-year life would be rewarded with an eternity of enjoyment, of Jannah, or 60, 70, 80-year life of sin would be punished, or let's just say a 60, 70, 80-year life of kufr would be punished with an eternity in hellfire. Like, it sounds unfair, right? It appears unfair, but why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, should it not be like for like, or that should there not be some sort of balance to justice in terms of how long it is for, given that the kufr wasn't forever. And I've read the answer to this before, but there's a particular point made here that I thought was really profound, and that is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's justice isn't just about physical actions. It isn't just about the deeds themselves, but rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's justice is profound and subtle enough to take into consideration people's will, intent, and what they've basically the state of mind and self that causes sin, right? Because that is also taken into consideration. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is able to judge the potential of a person in terms of good and evil. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that if a person had been allowed to live for eternity, what they would do or what they wouldn't do. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just takes that into consideration. But the point of it is that, so this is one way to look at it, and people might think, oh, that doesn't sound fair. But the thing to learn from it is this, that this is probably clear and irrefutable evidence of how significant intention and will is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when it comes to action. So when it comes to action, this whole idea that the hadith obviously tells us, Inna Allah la yanzuru ila suwarikum wa ajsadikum, that Allah doesn't look at your appearances and He doesn't look at your physical bodies, but He looks at your intention. He looks at your intentions, your hearts, basically, and the deeds that come forth from that. This is probably the greatest evidence of how important intentions are, and how important the state of the heart is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I've said this before, that we have to recognize that there's a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He in Revelation, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala constantly speaks to the heart. Right? That the Quran is essentially, the Quran as a revelation is addressed to the hearts of people. Right? Because that's what matters. So and as a result, this idea of the path being one of a constant struggle against the self is really proof of the fact that the struggle is an internal one, and actions are just a manifestation of the internal state of a person. Deeds are a manifestation of the internal state of a person, and the judgment of deeds in the dunya is very different to the judgment of deeds in the akhirah. And this is why in the akhirah a person can attain salvation because of the quality of one deed, not because the deed appears to be great. The act of feeding a cat, feeding an animal, the act of generosity to an animal isn't on the face of it great, considering everything else and all of the other possible deeds a person can do. But there are hadith that say that imply that there will be people whose deed would have come from such a beautiful state of mind that one action would outweigh a lifetime of sin, right? And therefore, a pure state of mind, or working towards purity of self, and trying to bring a purity of self to deeds and to actions, is something that will be a big factor in hisab and in judgment on in akhirah. And therefore consciousness is critical, and consciousness is ihsan, is to do things as though they are being done in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right, so continuing on, وَاسْتُغْ فِي الطَّلَبِ تَرِثْ عِلْمَ الْبَصَائِرِ وَتَبْدُ لَكَ عُيُونُ الْمَعَارِفِ وتميز بنفسك علم ما يرد عليك بخالص التوفيق فإنما السبق لمن عمل والخشية لمن علم والتوكل لمن وثق والخوف لمن أيقن والمزيد لمن شكر. And be true in your quest. I suppose is the best way to translate that. And be true in the quest, and in return for that, you will inherit deep insight or knowledge, insightful knowledge, ilm al-basair, and fountains of ma'rifah, fountains of knowledge, will appear to you. وتميز بنفسك علم ما يرد عليك بخالص التوفيق, and distinguish yourself with knowing what has come to you through pure tawfiq, through pure assistance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then a few kind of lines of wisdom. فَإِنَّمَا السَّبْقُ لِمَنْ عَمَلَ, because the one who acts will race ahead, and fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes to the one who knows, the one who has knowledge, and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or tawakkul rather, tawakkul comes to the one who has confidence, meaning has trust, right, who trusts. وَالْخَوْفُ لِمَنْ أَيْقَنَ, and fear is for the one who has conviction. So fear is associated with knowledge, and it's associated with conviction, and increase, abundance of blessings, an increase in blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increasing what He has given is for the one who is grateful. There's a couple of things I want to unpack here, because it sounds like lines of poetry, that does. So being true in one's quest is about doing things truly for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's about sincerity and about trying to constantly strip away conflicts of interest, strip away other reasons why we might be doing them. And if those reasons exist anyway, so if, for example, our deeds or the path that we're on has other interests mixed, then to engage in reflection to start to clear a line between purity of intention, i.e. doing things for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and other things that are tied to it. Does that make sense? So recognizing that the peripheral benefits of being a person who works in charity, being a person who has become now known for piety, or being a person who is known for, I don't know, good character, and so on and so forth, taking a moment to reflect on the extent to which our intentions remain purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how do we process the fame, the good name, how do we process the respect, how do we process perhaps the odd bits of dunyawi fa'ida, material fa'ida, because people are now giving you more gifts and giving you awards or what have you, or people are recognizing piety, and with that comes a certain honor, a certain status. So coming up with a way to process that ties in with our worldview. So for example, accepting these things as blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And therefore being grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for them. And then making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah doesn't allow these things to get to our heads, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't allow our intentions to be tainted by these things. And then reflecting that on the fact that the good deeds that we do, we will do them anyway, and that we continue to do them purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that these things are just things that are blessings that come with it, and we accept them with gratitude. But also trying to find moments, those moments of privacy, those moments of private worship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, things that we do that nobody else, making a point of doing things that also, in addition, that nobody else knows about, and therefore nobody can discuss, nobody can know, nobody can praise, and nobody can reward, and so forth. So that there is still something that is between just me and my Lord, between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? So this is about constantly evaluating the truthfulness or the genuineness, if you like, and the sincerity of our quest on the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the reward of that is tarif ilm al-basair, that if people can be genuine, then what will happen is new insights, new knowledge will open up to us. Things will open up to us that we never thought of before, particularly in what matters, not being able to answer people's fit questions, but in terms of what matters, in terms of being able to really process aspects of our spirituality, being able to process aspects of ourselves, getting to know ourselves better, getting to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala better, getting to know our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala better, and so on and so on. So such insights will open up to us. There is a hadith that whoever acts upon what they know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them, bequeaths them knowledge that they did not possess before. Right? Meaning it's almost as if there are curtains in front of us that, or latent, that there are these latent doors that are closed, basically, to knowledge that just isn't in books, isn't in lectures, isn't in halaqat, that open up, but these are spiritual rewards. They open up upon acting on what we know. So the more we act on what we know, the more of these doorways open up, and we have access to knowledge that was not available to us. And this knowledge actually is best placed when it's received on top of, or in addition to, a valid understanding of the basics of things, right? So the order, and if you remember, there was this in one of the sessions we discussed this. If we do things in the order of gaining knowledge of Sharia, i.e. knowledge of Deen, then on the basis of that knowledge, knowing what is halal, what is haram, what is permissible, what is sunnah, what is bid'ah, for example, we work on our spirituality, right? So then our spirituality is a valid spirituality that conforms with the Sharia. And then the next step, if you like, on the journey would be, so we have knowledge, we act upon that knowledge, we pursue our spiritual development, and the reward for that is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens up more pathways to knowledge. Right? That's the order. And then similarly, the other things that result in rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are so the bit of advice he gives is very difficult to unpack this, but he's saying that one of the things that a unique quality that one should pursue, one should try to achieve, is the ability to recognize what you have received purely as assistance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has rewarded us with something, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us something from himself, when something is part of the reward of gratitude, the reward of good action, then we recognize it. And this is connected exactly to what I said earlier about if we are working on the path, if we are working to move on to the path of good, and we're working to rectify ourselves, with it will come certain benefits, right? And there are multiple challenges associated with those benefits. And one challenge is first to recognize that this is inshallah reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah did promise reward. من عمل صالحا من ذكر أو أنثى وهو مؤمن فلنحيينه حياة طيبة. For example, that whoever does good deeds, whether a man or a woman, and they're a believer, then we will give them a good life, right? One state of mind, the contentment that comes with good deeds, with committing to Allah's commands, and committing to the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, committing to a path of development and spirituality and growth and so on, comes with a state of mind that is much healthier than perhaps what it was before. So recognizing that these things are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one aspect of processing the benefits of good deeds. And the second is not allowing these benefits to impact negatively upon our ikhlas, upon our intentions. So he's saying that this is a unique quality, to be able to recognize when something is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you accept that blessing. And then he's actually giving examples of these blessings, that people who act upon their knowledge, or who do amal, they tend to excel ahead. They tend to excel ahead. This excelling ahead is a reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is tawfiq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَالْخَشْيَةُ لِمَنْ عَلِمْ. Allah says, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء in the Quran, that indeed it is those who know, those who have knowledge, they are the ones who attain a kind of a humble fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They attain humility and fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that greater fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the ability to cry before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the ability to be concerned about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hisab and so on, that increases as we know more and more about Allah, as we know more and more about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's punishment. And this knowledge that the Quran speaks about is in the context of knowing Allah's creation. It's not in the context of learning religious knowledge about halal and haram, right? This is a famous verse, by the way. It's often quoted. Have you heard it? So indeed, it is the people of knowledge that fear Allah. You've heard this verse before. إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. Yes. So normally, what commonly happens is often quoted in the context of scholarship. Does that make sense? You've heard. I'm sure you've heard this in talks and stuff or in articles, right? That indeed it is the knowledge, it is the people of knowledge, because the word ulama is used. What do we know of the word ulama? Scholars, right? People of knowledge. So people even translate the verse as indeed it is the scholars who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a way of encouraging scholarship, or as a way of showing the virtue of scholarship. Scholarship has its virtue. But this verse, although it can have that meaning, and that is part of the meaning, The context of the verse is actually not about religious scholarship. The context of the verse is about knowledge of creation. And the word ulama simply means those who know. Right? So, if I can recall it correctly. So, أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ أَنزَلَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً فأخرجنا به ثمرات مختلف ألوانها ومن الجبال جدد بيض وحمر مختلف ألوانها وغرابيب سود ومن الناس والدواب والأنعام مختلف ألوانه كذلك إنما يخشى الله من عباده العلماء. That's the context. Those are the verses, right? So the verse begins with ألم تر أن الله أنزل من السماء ماء. Do you not see that Allah sends down from the heavens rain? Right? فأخرجنا به ثمرات مختلف ألوانها. And from that rain we bring out fruits of different colors, of a variety of colors. ومن الجبال جدد بيض وحمر مختلف ألوانها وغرابيب سود. And the mountains, when you look at them and you reflect upon them, you see that they're not of one color. They're also of different colors, right? Black, red, and so on. These solid mountains, they also come in different colors, right? Some are snow-peaked, and some are brown in color, and others are red in color. There are others that are green. They're covered in grass, and different parts of different mountains are different colors, and so on, right? So there is this variety about them. ومن الجبال جدد بيض وحمر مختلف ألوانها وغرابيب سود. ومن الناس والدواب والأنعام مختلف ألوانه كذلك. Then people, right? Animals, yes, beasts and animals, they are also of different colors. Even animals of the same species, there is variety. And so these verses are about variety in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. And it's then that Allah says, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ. Indeed, it is those who know, who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the knowledge that one gets upon reflection, genuine and honest reflection with regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. And you know what's fascinating about this verse? This verse is deliberately pointing towards complexity and variety. You understand? It's as if it's preempting the case made by atheists and so on, that things happen by random. And in fact, the argument is that if things were random, then they would not be so complex. Does that make sense? If things were random, they wouldn't be so complex, and they wouldn't be so various. The variety, there wouldn't be such substantial variety. Anyway, and it is reflecting on these things is a particular branch of knowledge. What we learn from that is a branch of knowledge, and that knowledge results in this fear, this awe of this recognition and awe of a creator. Right? And this knowledge results in a humbling of the self, and a recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And thus the reward of reflecting and knowing Allah's creation and reflecting on Allah's creation is this fear of Allah. Right? So going back to this point about reward against being true in the path, being genuine in the path. So if I was to speak purely in scriptural terms, and you'll see this in behavioral terms as well, right? I don't know what your individual backgrounds are, but you know, depending on what you do, you may find this more useful or less useful. So, in scriptural terms, given that to us as believers, the Quran is a book that essentially tells us facts, right? The Quran it tells us the way things are. The Quran is a book of news, of just information, of khabar, of things that are just conveyed to us from the past, for example, right? The Quran is also a book that teaches us that the Quran is also a book of command. It tells us what to do. It orders. It instructs. right? Meaning it is a book of it's a book of authority. It carries authority and it uses that authority. It's divine authority and uses that authority to instruct and command. It's also a book of tarbiyah. It is a book of nurture. It tells us within it is a lifestyle, right? It tells us the kind of cultural norms that it wants us to abide by, because these norms are based upon the fitrah, the nature upon which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the natural way upon which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants humanity to live. Does that make sense? Now, what that means is that all of these things are not, none of this is fixed, meaning because human beings have free will, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the book because all of the things that the book represents for us, they're not inviolable, meaning that all of them can be violated by mankind. Does that make sense? So mankind can disbelieve the facts and the information the Quran gives. So when the Quran tells mankind that Allah is their creator, mankind can go against that and say, no, there's no creator. Meaning it's possible for mankind to violate. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs mankind to do certain things, right, to follow certain commands, it is possible for mankind to go against those instructions, to defy those instructions. And third, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells mankind that I created you to behave a particular way, which is your fitrah, it is possible for mankind to go against that fitrah, right? Or to develop cultural norms that essentially give birth to instincts that go against that fitrah. Does that make sense? So now, once we recognize that, we recognize that when people disbelieve in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when people reflect on creation, know creation, make scientific advancements based on a detailed and thorough study of creation, and then come out of the other side of that, disbelieving in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, defying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What in scriptural terms, what Allah is telling us is that this defiance of Allah, this lack of recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, cannot be based upon a genuine openness to the truth. Meaning, so if I speak purely based on what the Quran is trying to say, and I speak as a believer, then as a believer, there is a judgment, basically. And that judgment is that somebody who reflects on creation and that on the other side of it doesn't come out fearing Allah, recognizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that person doesn't attain the reward of knowledge of creation because of the fact that they did not have truthfulness in their quest. They did not go into the quest of knowledge seeking truth. So they took out from it what they wanted. Does that make sense? Meaning if a person isn't genuinely open to it, it will not come. So the reward is a person is genuinely seeking, and they seek, and what they learn isn't halal, haram. It's creation and so on. But if they're genuinely open to truth, they will come out of it knowing and fearing God. Knowing and fearing God. Conversely, if a person does that and comes out not knowing and not fearing God, it is because they were never genuine in the first place. That's basically what scripturally, if you were to just infer from the Quran, that's basically what the Quran is telling us. Behaviorally, if we were to just observe, we will often see that there is that the behavior of the mind that knows creation but denies Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is consistent with the behavior of somebody that the Quran describes as a jahid, as somebody who commits an act of transgression against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That there is a certain rebellion or latent rebellion against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is taking place. Does that make sense? Right? Meaning that mankind, there is a kind of acknowledgement that there could be, but I would rather not recognize. Or that, well, atheists often say this, and when they hear it, it kind of, I regret that people say things like this, but it makes you smile, because when you know the Quran, you see behavior consistent with what the Quran has to say about people, you kind of reflect on the Quran, go back to the Quran, and you think, wow, the Quran actually speaks about this, right? So when people say things like, well, if God is there, he should have revealed himself. You understand? Why is he playing games with us? All right, and I don't want to believe in such a God. So you hear these types of sentences. I'm not quoting anybody in particular, but the kind of the big players among the atheists, your Richard Dawkins and your Sam Harris's and people like that. That's the kind of language that comes out of them, right? And it's so popular that essentially it's become characteristic of the atheist mind, right? But these are all words of rebellion. These are all words of what the Quran describes as, or Islam describes as juhud, right? These are words of baghi. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that people disagree about things that are clear, right? Only because they only disagree about these obvious matters after knowledge has come to them, meaning revelation has come to them, only out of transgression or rebellion among themselves. Does that make sense? Right? Then there is the verse that speaks about disbelieving in Allah, atheists basically, and it talks about how what's really happening is that people are making their own desires their Lord. Does that make sense? I would rather not live, a God that I would rather not live my life and restrict my life to the commands of a God that can't be bothered to reveal himself. This is atheist talk. Does that make sense? I'd rather live my life how I want. You understand what I mean? So this kind of talk, and this is basically when people, and when that comes from people who have knowledge of creation, for example, so they're scientists, because this is led by people of knowledge. This is led by people who are scientists, who have knowledge of technology, knowledge of science, knowledge of creation, and so on and so forth, at a very, very detailed level. When it's them talking like that, then you know that they have not attained the reward of knowledge, right? And the reason why a person doesn't attain the reward of knowledge is because they are not genuine in their path, in their quest. Tawakkul is for the person who trusts. You have to trust. If you want to attain tawakkul as a spiritual outcome, right? As a spiritual attribute, then there has to be trust. Your iman has to lead to trusting in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes there are going to be many moments in life where you have to just say, tawakkaltu ala Allah, right? I trust in Allah. I accept whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides. You do your bit, and then you constantly trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning that tawakkul as a spiritual quality comes from people who trust, who have confidence in Allah. And finally, fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes to people who have absolute conviction. Meaning, if you can only truly fear Allah if you truly are convinced that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take me to account, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward the good, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will punish the bad, that Jannah exists, that Jahannam exists, and that people will live eternally, good people will live eternally in Jannah, and that the eternal abode of the disbeliever is Jahannam, and that those who believed but sinned will have to give an account for their sins and be punished for their sins in Jahannam until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives them, right? And they end up in Jannah. These are matters that are absolute, matters of yaqeen, matters of conviction. And a person can only fear those things for themselves, or hope for Jannah, for example. Those things can only happen if there is conviction. So fear comes from conviction. And then increase from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes from gratitude, right? That when a person is grateful for something, they are likely to see increase in that thing. And when they see that increase, and the point of this isn't that you always get what you expect. No, the point of it is recognizing when you have received something, right? Not everything that you will be grateful for will be rewarded in an increase in that thing. Does that make sense? Because every instance of increase in something that you have done or you have been grateful for isn't necessarily good for you. So it isn't possible to know how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has rewarded a person. But if the reward is there and you can notice it and observe it and see it, then as a believer, the quality that is expected of us is recognition that this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does that make sense? There are just two ways to process it. One is processing things by way of expectation, right? I have done my salah, right? I have done my fard. Why am I still struggling with my nawafil? That is the attitude of expectation, right? And what we're talking about here is the attitude of recognition, which is, alhamdulillah, I've been consistently doing my fara'id for some years now, and it seems to me now that my nawafil are becoming easier. Alhamdulillah, this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is because I have expressed gratitude for the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me the tawfiq to do my fara'id, for example, right? So this is a spiritual reward for being able to, right? I have persevered to learn about deen and so genuinely learn about deen, and it seems that my amal, or my ability to act according to what I know, is increasing. Alhamdulillah. And a person expresses gratitude for that. That is recognition. Do you understand? Right? So gratitude is a deed. Gratitude is a deed that is not conditional upon receiving what you expect. Does that make sense? Gratitude isn't something that is conditional upon receiving what you expect. Gratitude is a deed that is conditional upon recognizing Allah's favor. لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ وَلَإِن كَفَرْتُمْ إِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ. The moment you recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's favor, right, you express gratitude. Okay? What that means is gratitude therefore is constant, because Allah's favor is constant. Yes? So a way to achieve gratitude is to constantly seek out Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's favors upon us, which are many. And that is, the default is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala favors us, right? So upon every joint of the son of Adam, there is a sadaqah out of gratitude. There is incumbent upon the son of Adam against every joint a sadaqah on every day that the sun rises. You heard this before? It's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Upon every joint of the son of Adam, there is a sadaqah. Right? On every day that the sun rises. And the Sahaba say, well, how are we supposed to meet the requirements of that? How do we give sadaqah on every single joint, every single day. Right? And so the Prophet ﷺ says, well, you know, every tasbih is a sadaqah. Every subhanallah is a sadaqah. Every alhamdulillah is sadaqah. Every la ilaha illallah is a sadaqah, meaning the way to be grateful for all of those favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? A person who doesn't have an arm still has all those other joints. Right? Meaning that, you know, and you can go on, you can extend that analogy, because the idea here isn't some people try to count the joints to try to work out how many sadaqats are due upon a person, but I don't think that's the point of the hadith. It's common in Arabic or to use certain analogies or certain metaphors to express abundance, that the bounties upon a person, the favors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon a person are so abundant that it's like the joints, right, that a person has, right? Something that normally people don't count. So therefore it's innumerable. It's something that you can't count. And therefore there's this immeasurable sadaqah that is required of a person every single day that the sun rises, which means that the only way, because it's not possible to quantifiably meet the requirements of that sadaqah, no matter how rich you are, right? Then the way to do it is by expressing gratitude spiritually. And so the Prophet ﷺ taught that subhanallah is a sadaqah, la ilaha illallah sadaqah, alhamdulillah is a sadaqah, Allahu Akbar is a sadaqah, because these things are also unquantifiable ways of means of gratitude. Right? Because what is the value of a subhanallah? Right? What is the value of a Allahu Akbar? What is the value of la ilaha illallah? What is the value of these words together? The Prophet ﷺ said that these are the purest of words. Right? That these things, that a single instance of one of these words is more valuable than heavens and the earth. You understand what I mean? Meaning that just like Allah's favor is unquantifiable, the Prophet taught us ways of gratitude that are also unquantifiable. Right? Anyway, so and therefore the point of it is that gratitude increase as a result of gratitude isn't about expectation. Increase as a result of gratitude is about recognition. So recognizing that I have received something as a result of, as a favor of Allah, or as a result of my gratitude, or as a result of my good deed, or out of the favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? A sure way to danger, a sure way to lead to corruption of the heart is to develop the attitude of entitlement with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is very dangerous today because people are very entitled nowadays. To some extent, it's very easy to become to develop an entitled mindset with Allah. Does that make sense? So therefore, a person starts to feel entitled by comparing what they don't have with what other people have. So God, why do I have less? Why have you favored so and so and not favored me? Why have you favored the kuffar and not favored the Muslims? You know, etc., etc. This is how the entitlement attitude starts to take off, and then it grows and grows and grows and turns into grievance. It turns into grievance, right? And it's a spiritual malady, right? There is no entitlement with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You take what you get. Simple as that. Okay. وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ مَا يَصِلُ الْعَبْدُ إِلَيْهِ مِنَ الْفَهْمِ بِقَدْرِ تَقْدِيمِ عَقْلِهِ وَمَوْجُودِ عِلْمِهِ. I don't know if I'm going to have time to discuss this. وَمَوْجُودِ عِلْمِهِ بِتَقْوَاهُ لِلَّهِ وَطَاعَتِهِ. We'll discuss this next week, inshallah. It's a long paragraph. Or I'll continue if there's no questions. Any questions? I'll take a break, have a few sips of coffee, and then if there's no questions, maybe I'll do one more paragraph. Any questions?
What is the consequence of not acting on what you know?
You know you have knowledge, but you don't act upon it. Is there?
We've not, so I have to be careful with how I answer that, right? Because I have to do this with our students all the time. The question is, what is the consequence of not acting upon what you know, right? The difficulty with this question is that it can be answered in a way that people get scared of knowing, right? Do you understand my point? So, meaning that, so the first thing we have to recognize is, this is, I suppose, I think this is the best way to put it. The first thing we have to recognize that knowing is inevitable, inescapable, and not knowing is punishable. Meaning ignorance is a sin. Why? Because knowing is an obligation. That's the first thing to recognize, right? So therefore, there is knowledge that is part of one's duty. Then there is knowledge that is either a reward from Allah, a reward for, or it's because of greater intelligence, greater academic ability gifted to you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is knowledge because Allah granted you the opportunity to learn, right? And so on. So even La ilaha illallah in the Quran, even La ilaha illallah, the very basic tenet of faith, right? Even that comes preceded by the command to know. يَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ. Right, Imam Bukhari points this out in Sahih Bukhari very nicely. That even Iman is preceded by knowing. Knowledge is the first command, even before Iman. Why, if you don't, what do you believe in if you don't know? Does that make sense? So, and then anything that is obligatory upon a person is obligatory to know it. So Salah is fard. Knowing Salah sufficiently to be able to fulfill it correctly is a fard. Because being able to perform your Salah and discharge the duty of Salah is contingent upon you being able to, you knowing how to do it. Otherwise you can't discharge that duty, right? So it's in that sense that knowledge is an obligation, a duty, it is inescapable, right? Then there is a part of knowledge that is to do with increasing in knowledge. And increasing in knowledge is something that is a path that people just end up on, or people seek it. People need a conscious to seek it. And you seek it because you recognize its virtue. You seek it because it's a path of honor. You seek it because of your own personal curiosity. However you seek, whatever the reasons are, right, with it comes further responsibility and accountability, right? And as a result, the consequences of not knowing the first layer of knowledge, which is obligatory knowledge, is the same as not fulfilling any other obligation. Do you understand? Because your prayer is contingent upon it, your zakat is contingent upon it, your hajj is contingent upon it, your fasting is contingent upon it, and for every obligatory aspect of, say, a fast that a person is remiss of because they didn't know the mas'ala, they're actually committing two sins. For every rule of salah that a person doesn't know, and as a result of which for years the salah isn't done correctly, there are two sins being committed. One is the sin itself of not doing your salah, and the other is the sin of knowing. Perhaps the sin, the first sin is contingent, is a result of the first sin is a result of the second. The sin of not knowing that your salah breaks if you do this, right? If you do something. The act is a result of the sin of knowing. It may well be that on the day of judgment, who knows? On the day of judgment, perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala won't even consider the fact that you actually did the act wrong. But the one that you're going to end up accountable for is not knowing. Why did you not commit to the level of knowledge needed for you to be able to fulfill your duty? Would you accept that level of ignorance in any other aspect of your life? And this is where the accountability becomes fair. The reason why it's fair to ask that question is because as human beings, as intelligent human beings, we would not accept that level of ignorance for anything else, right? People don't accept that level of ignorance when it comes to living their lives, right? If you need to know something to get a job, you go away and you know it, right? If you need to know something to fill in a form or make an application for a benefit or something like that, you go ahead and you figure out a way and you find out, you know, or you go and ask somebody who knows. You go and seek the assistance of somebody who knows, who shows you or helps do it for you or something like that. Or tells you, no, you have the signature has to be yours. I can't sign it for you. I can fill the form in for you, but you've got to sign it. You understand my point? Meaning these are processes that we naturally engage in all the time. The same is true of knowledge. Okay? So that's the first layer of knowledge. The second layer of knowledge is knowledge that comes out of increasing in knowledge, what you might call non-obligatory knowledge or fard kifaya knowledge. Knowledge that is advanced, the tafaqquh, deep knowledge, advanced knowledge, and so on, that is an obligatory upon society for some to know, or for a sufficient number of people to know, but not for everyone. So this is, we're talking about the whole intellectual universe, okay? The Islamic sciences, but also other sciences. There is a level, it's difficult, but you can surmise that there is a level of sufficiency in all of the different diverse areas of knowledge that is required in every community, and therefore is required in the Muslim Ummah, right? But it's not an obligation that falls upon every single individual. It falls upon the community. The community is responsible for making sure, as a whole, is responsible for making sure that some people attain that level of knowledge. But that can come organically out of a recognition of the virtue of knowledge. Meaning, because in society there is a recognition that knowledge is virtuous, right? That from knowledge comes development, from knowledge comes greater closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from knowledge comes greater enlightenment, etc., etc., etc. From knowledge comes civilization, and so on and so forth. Because the virtue of knowledge is acknowledged within the core of our tradition, organically people will feel encouraged. People who are intellectually endowed will feel encouraged to increase in knowledge to varying degrees. But with each degree of advancement comes further responsibility. I suppose that comes with all increase. A person is endowed with money. What happens? Is there not more responsibility? Is there not more accountability? So in a sense, it is kind of universal. It's true of other things. A person of great strength, right? A person of great intellect, a person of, a person who lives a long life. They can't suddenly decide that, oh, the rest of humanity lives an average of 65, 70 years. So my good deeds are going to stop at 70 and then I'm going to retire. Does he not have to now pray for another 10, 15 years? Does he not have to give zakah for another 10, 15 years? So in a sense, all blessings, all ni'am come with added responsibility and added accountability. And the same is true with knowledge, right? So therefore the harms of not acting according to one's knowledge is basically greater accountability, because the more knowledge you have, the more Allah has favored you. And with all favors comes greater responsibility and accountability. Yeah. Well, that's a different issue. It depends on why. It depends on why and depends on why. Understand? There's no excuse for obligatory knowledge. For other knowledge, you try your best. Another thing is, and one of the reasons why the question of knowledge is so profound is because of this whole question of is ignorance an excuse, and is ignorance bliss, and that kind of thing. So it's like, oh, if a person didn't know, then they're not accountable, or they didn't know, so as a result. But it's not as simple as they didn't know. It depends on why they didn't know. And again, it's not a question of a person didn't know. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge them based on the circumstances that resulted in their lack of knowledge. The issue here is that a person knows, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted them the gift of knowledge, the gift of intellect, the gift of opportunity to know. Yet they decided not to act upon their knowledge. There is a greater accountability there that has to be recognized, because no gift is greater than the gift of knowledge. Make sense? Yeah.
So what would, I guess, what's the minimum amount of knowledge a person should have before they come to?
It's very difficult to quantify by saying you have to know A, B, C, and D.
Finding my 5 of those.
Yeah. So the way the ulama explain is, they say everything that is every piece of knowledge, every nugget of knowledge that is required to fulfill one's obligatory duties to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is obligatory. Every nugget of knowledge that is required to fulfill one's sunan, right? So let's go with the obligatory. So every nugget of knowledge, every piece of knowledge required to discharge one's duties, one's fara'id, is fard. Every piece of knowledge required for a person to know what is haram and to avoid the haram is fard, because avoidance of haram is fard. Yes? And then similarly, every piece of knowledge required to fulfill one's sunnah, and according to the different madhahib, if you like, in the Hanafi madhab, every piece of knowledge required to fulfill a wajib is also wajib. And therefore, every piece of knowledge required to avoid a makruh tahrimi is also wajib. And then every piece of knowledge required to fulfill a sunnah is also sunnah. And every bit of sunnah as in, not sunnah as in sunnah of the Prophet, but sunnah as in that level of emphasis. Does that make sense? Or nafal, right? Every piece of knowledge required to avoid a makruh, right, would itself have the same level of importance. Does that make sense? And knowledge of something that the Sharia is indifferent about becomes indifferent. Meaning, if something is mubah in the Sharia, then knowing about it is mubah. So, for example, if somebody says to me, "What does Islam have to say about learning?" I don't know. Give me an example. Like
Cosmology.
Huh?
Cosmology.
And I would say as an element of cosmology is part of theology, right? Aspects of cosmology are part of it. I would say that I would put that into the category of fard kifaya. So remember that there are 2 types of fard. So all knowledge that as a civilization or as a community, as an ummah, that is required for us to know, for the ummah, for Islam to remain strong, for us to be able to live our lives properly. All of the knowledge required in order for the deen to be preserved, for spirituality to be preserved, for Islam to be preserved, for the protection of the state. These all fall under fard kifaya. Why? Because, for example, protection of the state is fard kifaya, protection of life is fard kifaya. Making arrangements for all of these things become fard kifaya, and therefore knowledge of it is fard kifaya. Meaning, as long as a sufficient number of people have the knowledge, is enough. Does that make sense? One of the problems with the Muslim Ummah is that we haven't, as the numbers of people have grown and needs have become more and more complex, we haven't done anything to statistically keep track of what the need is or the extent of the need. Does that make sense? As a result of which, we don't know how many scholars of what caliber do we need to ensure that our standards of education are maintained, for example. We don't know, it's difficult for us to quantify what caliber and what types of different doctors we need to ensure the health of society. You know, I mean, the West has developed those things, and they measure, if you like, the quality of the health service of a particular country. One of the measures is the number of doctors to the number of citizens, the ratio of doctors to the number of citizens, and so on and so forth. But in the Islamic world, we never did that. Part of the decline of the Muslim Ummah was a decline in these types of things. So fard kifaya, there is a complexity to fard kifaya that kind of that requires state level thinking by state level actors. That is a leadership responsibility that at the basic level falls on everyone, because ultimately leaders come out of society, they come out of community and so forth. Does that make sense? What was your question again? How much?
What's the
Yeah.
minimum?
So the ulama basically frame it. So the ulama frame it in that simple way, right? So now the question is, okay, well, how much must I know? That then becomes a question of curriculum. You understand? But it is possible to know one's fara'id and one's sunnah and so on and so forth by studying a certain amount of aqidah and a certain amount of fiqh. You understand? Right? And the ulama have done a pretty good job of codifying some of that. So in aqidah, the priority isn't complex discussions of theology, but the priority is to know what we must believe in, right? What we must believe in and what the consequences of those beliefs are in our lives. In fiqh is to do with how we live our lives. Jurisprudence to do with how we live our lives, and that has different chapters. And there are challenges here, but to put it simply, you have the chapter of ibadah or chapters of ibadah. So there are all of the obligations that are to do with worship. But incorporated within those chapters, if you were to study a certain amount of fiqh, would be all of the sunan that relate to ibadat, all of the nawafil related or related to ibadat, or all of the prohibitions related to ibadat, all of the makruhat related to ibadat, right? Then you have after that. So when it comes to ibadat, we're talking about your salah, tahara, salah, saum, zakah, and hajj. Then you have your mu'amalat or your mu'asharat, right? So this is to do with your dealings, your financial dealings, financial matters, and so on, financial relationships, financial contracts, etc., etc. Then you have your mu'asharat, things that are to do with society and social interactions, which is to do with marriage, divorce, having children, the family, bringing up children, everything that's related to that, right? So there are parts of that are obligatory, parts of it that are not obligatory. The obligatory parts, for example, understanding what marriage is, right? What are the important components of it? What are the duties? What are the rights? Gonna have children. I think that there is an obligatory knowledge requirement when people start thinking about having children. Does that make sense? It's actually it's actually an awareness of this that resulted in us setting up this organization. That there is a place that people can come to fulfill those requirements. Then you start moving into areas that are perhaps a little bit more kind of from the Fard Kifaya dimension, right? So fiqh discusses things like international relations, jihad, and things like that. That move into that might not affect every single individual in the same way, but some people have to know these things. So ibadat and personal jurisprudence, everybody must know. The aqidah that tells you what you must believe in, everybody must know. And then there's one more area, and that area is spirituality. What you must know to ensure that you are constant, that you are on the correct spiritual path, and that you're constantly growing and growing spiritually. Why? Because that is the domain of taqwa, that is the domain of good character and good conduct. Does that make sense? And in that domain, in the domain of good character, good conduct, there are fara'id, there are obligations. When it comes to taqwa, there is an obligatory element there. When it comes to sincerity, there is an obligatory element. When it comes to intention, there is an obligatory element, without which our actions don't get accepted. When it comes to gratitude, these are all matters of spirituality. There is an obligatory element without which they're difficult to quantify, which is why fiqh, jurisprudence doesn't cover it. It's not covered in law, but there are obligatory components to all of these things. There is an amount of khushu' in prayer. While the fiqh of prayer might teach you what the fara'id of prayer are, what the wajibat of prayer are, what the sunan of prayer are, what breaks prayer. Meaning it teaches you how to physically perform the prayer. It doesn't talk much about khushu'. It doesn't talk much about recognizing that you're standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't talk to you about the fact that Allah responds to what you say. It doesn't tell you much about revering Allah when you stand in prayer, about being in awe of Allah's presence while being in prayer, about understanding what you say, etc., etc., etc. This isn't, but some of that is obligatory. So therefore, spirituality and constantly being engaged in spiritual discourse, there are elements of that are obligatory. There are elements of our character that are obligatory. Why? Because ultimately, having underdeveloped or poorly developed characters results in committing haram against others. Does that make sense? If you don't work on your compassion, you're going to hurt people. If you don't work on your mercy, you're going to hurt people. Right? If you don't work on your generosity, you might even go as far as struggling to give your zakat, which ties to which is an obligation. Right? If you don't work on your discipline and motivation, for example, right? Let's take that as a spiritual dimension, as part of your spiritual dimension, right? If you don't work on your discipline and things like that, you're going to struggle to get off Fajr, which is an obligation. So, 10-minute summary, right? Iman, Islam, Ihsan. There you go. So, in the broadest terms, there's obligatory and non-obligatory knowledge in each one of these three categories. In Iman, in Islam, and remember, it's Iman, it's not theology. It's not who's deviant and who's not deviant, and how do you understand the verses of Sifat and stuff like that. Those are theological discussions. It's Iman. You understand? What must I believe in, and what is the consequence of that belief, and how do I attain conviction in those matters? That's what Iman is about, right? What are the traits of Iman? Yeah, what is the sweetness of Iman? Right? What are the requirements of Iman? What are the branches of Iman? That's what we need to learn. Okay? Then you have Islam, which is your fiqh, right? How to live your life according to the tenets of Islam. And finally, spirituality, which comes under Ihsan. A curriculum that covers all of that is a curriculum for every single Muslim. On that front, our development is poor. People have tried subjectively to develop different things, but often at the level of comprehensive education for the masses, I think across the board, the whole of the Ummah is remiss. There is no comprehensive educational model for what every single Muslim must know. I don't think anywhere in the Muslim world. Right? I think some places where populations are small, there are commendable efforts, right? But in terms of in the Muslim world, I mean, it's actually quite depressing in the Muslim world, right? But small populations, like I've seen really, really good arrangements in places like Singapore, believe it or not, right? But partly because there is an indigenous Muslim population of about 600,000 people. Who are indigenous to the land, but after colonization they lost power, and as a result it's become a secular state. They're now a minority. They're only 15% of the whole population, but they remain a state religion. And as a result, because it's a developed nation, one of the most developed nations in the world, and it's a state religion, resources have been dedicated to religion, to Islam as a religion, and as a result of which there is an element of Islamic awareness in those countries, which is why development is important, because development provides solutions. Does that make sense? And where you have less development, you have less organized education. When you don't have organized education, you end up with people just being left out and people barely knowing their fara'id and so on. So if you go to the villages in a Muslim country, you shouldn't be surprised if you come across people who don't know the Fatiha. It's not that they don't. It's not that they're not Muslim. It's not that they're not sincere. There's just no education. There's no awareness. There's no just like they don't know Fatiha, they might not know the alphabet of their mother tongue. They're just as educated. They're just as illiterate in everything else. That the level of awareness needed just isn't there because knowledge or education hasn't taken root. In this country, we calculated that about 70 to 80% of Muslim children go through some sort of Islamic education through maktabs, madrasas, private tuition, and things like that. But the majority of that education is limited to learning Quran and learning Salah. So it's and some basics of belief. So they learn a bit of Iman partially. They learn it's not very contextual, so it really doesn't address some of the problems and so on. So they learn a bit of Iman. They learn a bit of their fiqh, mainly focused on Salah, but none of the other chapters are covered. So Tahara and Salah is covered, and they learn perhaps a little bit about spirituality if they have good teachers. So they learn. There's a partial education that most Muslims that go through that actually has contributed substantially to our survival as a Muslim community. But what we need is for that process. So the success. What are the successes? Right. The fact that 70% of our children get that level of education is a success. The fact that their education is they only get partial education is still a success, even though there is a massive failing there. And then the next challenge is to get to 100% and to make that the content of that education comprehensive. That's the big challenge for the Muslim community.
Should be unified.
If we could, yeah. I mean, if we were well organized, then we would unify it. But we're not well organized. However we do it, even if it's haphazard, even in each individual community, in the individual boroughs of London or wards of London or in individual towns, there needs to be an awareness that this is the challenge. This is what we must do. And we have to use everything available to us: online learning, on-campus learning, everything available, teacher training, everything available to us to get to that level. And if we did achieve that, we'd be one of the first in the world. But that's one of the big challenges. You understand? And it's one that the Muslim community doesn't take seriously. I'm telling you now. We're much more obsessed with the first thing people become practicing. The first thing they think about is organize lots of talks, right? Or maybe a little bit better. Let's get involved in the masjid. Okay, I think that's constructive to a certain extent because masajid are scattered all over the country. It's a place that people come, etc., etc. And then charity, right? Education, like the educational solution, it just doesn't occur. It's weird. It just doesn't occur to us when it should be the reverse. I've become like, what do I do, right? What do I need to learn? It's the first thing, and then what kind of provision do we have when it comes to education? That's the first, because that was the first obligation. Remember the way I broke it down for you. That was the first obligation. That's the first thing that a person should be aware of. But the way we understand knowledge, or our relationship with knowledge, is informal. That person probably came into deen through informal knowledge, and that's why our attitude towards knowledge is also informal. So our immediate instinct is let's organize lots of talks. But talks are not education. They're more like it's preaching. They're more like awareness. It's like TV, basically. TV is an education. Yes, you learn about things. You get to know about things. You get to get bits of information, putting the nonsense aside. But nobody would call it an education. Yeah. And
So I guess following that, what would you say for us individuals to, if we want to do something more not beneficial than something, what would you recommend?
So act locally, have global concerns. I've given you this. I've given you this. Call it a narrative, a strategy, whatever. Right? That's what I believe in. That's what I've dedicated my own work to. Right? If you summarize the projects I'm involved in, it's this. so we can have an overview, we can have an understanding from a knowledge point of view of what needs to be done, but we can only act locally. We all live somewhere. We all live in a particular postcode, right? To use our kind of nomenclature. We live in a particular postcode, right? And it's important to act locally and therefore survey what's available, find out who the actors are, offer them assistance, and then leverage the resources that you have access to. So, for example, this place is a resource, right? This halaqah is a resource. It's an opportunity, and you basically work to in a kind of exchange. There's a collaborative process of getting the resources from where they are somewhere else to where they're not, which may or may not be your locality. Or you might live in Whitechapel and you might think we're very, very well serviced here. But still, the beauty of acting locally is recognizing that somebody living 10 doors from East London Masjid is taking drugs.
That's the
Right.
issue.
Recognizing that around here there are Muslim girls selling themselves, selling their bodies. Around here, around Ibrahim College, around East London Mosque, right? They're doing it to feed drug habits, right? This is a high vehicle crime area. So the thing about acting, it's the most densely populated Muslim area in the whole of Europe, outside of the Muslim world. This is the most densely populated area of Muslims outside the Muslim world. Believe it or not, this is yes, the ambulance, and perhaps after that, New is one of these two, right? Yet, but it hasn't impacted on these areas positively, right? Now, as Muslims, what we tend to do is start looking. We become practicing, and we start looking for something to. We start looking to participate in something someone else is doing somewhere. So what we tend to do is we parachute ourselves out to become a part of something. Now that might be necessary. That might be what you need because you still feel spiritually weak, etc., etc. But if you want to contribute constructively, it's really important to recognize the power of working locally, in local groups, local people. One of the things that I suggested to our engagement team here, and we've not been able to get it off the ground, and it was supposed to, this halaqah was part of an engagement strategy to try to see how we can leverage our student population better. And one idea, I'm still going to insist that this happens at some point. And one of the ideas was to activate our part-time students, the evening students, who are adults, mature, they know who they are, they know where they are in their lives, and so on. To activate them based on the Act Locally principle we called it the postcode campaign, by organizing them according to postcode and encouraging that they become a force for good in their postcode, in their area. And where the postcode is densely Muslim populated. Remember, where there's a lot of Muslims, one of the reasons why there's still lots of problems is because the problems are multiplied there as well. The good is multiplied, but so is the bad, right? Because there's a big population of both, which is why Town Hamlets has the best the Muslim community has to offer and the worst, because the numbers are here. Does that make sense? Right? So, for example, if E1, if we gathered all of the students who are in who live in E1, we'll probably end up with the largest number. But because the population in E1 is so big, all of the students in E1 would have to probably split up into groups based on local masjid, or based on local ward, or something like that, or based on who knows who. But the point is that they get organized in groups and teams based on a small number of local activities, based on and we come up with a consistent strategy, and that way EC transitions to becoming a bit more than just a place where people come to study. So since you brought it up, right, I thought I'd mention that. So where do you live, for example?
E1.
E1, yeah. So if there were 10 other people from your locality that were also students here, or they weren't, for example, but there were 10 other people from your locality, then what I would encourage is that we work out a template, yeah, that you guys should in your area should be concerned about the quantity and the quality of Islamic educational provision at a grassroots level. So what's the quality of Islamic education like in your masjid, right? And you guys try to play a positive role, not a negative role. So sometimes what happens is when we activate young people, they go and they start having a go at the elders who are running the masjid, and it just all goes. So this is where we would be involved in trying to develop a methodology that basically works, that's much more cooperative and so on, and get involved and offer them, you know, a hand and manpower and expertise and you know, etc. Help organize a set number of events in your area. Perhaps even if you think it's useful, take one of our courses there if that helps, and so on, and have to do one or two other activities that strengthens our ability to take this strategy forward. Does that make sense? But so there's 5 or 10 of you doing that in your area in E1. In another area in E1, there's 5 or 10 doing it. You're doing it in whatever your postcode is. You're doing it in whatever your postcode is. And there is a templated strategy that then positively impacts that area. And the reason why it works is because there's some sort of collective and consistent thought behind it.
And it does at a very basic level, is the Tabligh Jamaat.
Yes, and that's where I took the idea from.
Okay.
The idea is actually from Tabligh because my background is Tablighi. But I feel that there is a way to inject some sophistication into the same methodology.
Yeah.
So the Tablighis, what they've done is they've realized that complexity can be difficult when you're dealing with farmers in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. So they came up with a very simple model.
Yeah.
6 points, propagation.
Yeah.
That's it. Simple. Their method is simple. 6 points, personal development, propagation. Right? So the 6 points is the simplicity of the message. The personal development makes the person better, improves their akhlaq, improves the commitment to salah, etc., etc., etc. The propagation keeps it going, continues to feed the cycle, right? Globally successful. In fact, according to the CIA, the most successful grassroots Islamic movement
According to the CIA.
The 2 most powerful, most successful grassroots Muslim movements in the world are the Tabligh movement and the Gulen movement of Turkey. And the Gulens, which I actually also got the opportunity to look at carefully, are an example of something that's not as global as the Tablighis, because the Tablighis are almost in every single country in the world, right? But the Gulens are in a limited number of countries, but they do it with a greater deal of sophistication, right? So for them, it's more about education, schools, curriculum. Their motto is education, charity, dialogue. Those are the 3 things they push for. They have, I mean, now they've fallen out with Erdogan and it's caused a massive problem in Turkey. But, you know, I remember visiting a tower block that was dedicated to their publications.
In Turkey.
In Istanbul.
Recently.
Yeah, they had like 20 or so periodicals, magazines. They were publishing books, you know, stuff like that. This massive, you know, complex, basically just dedicated to, you know, you won't find that, for example, with Tabligh.
So what is your
Tabligh
program?
is just one consistent message.
Your program that you talked about, when is that likely?
I don't know. It's going to depend a lot on being able to put together a core team of volunteers. to take you forward, because the only reason why we haven't been able to do it is because we're so limited in terms of resources. And often with these kind of things, I have to be the person that pushes it. And then there's so much I can do on my own. But what it needs is a core team of volunteers to be like a coordinating force behind the whole thing. And we have to have a consistent cycle of meetings with students. Every term that students come in, we try to get a small number of them activated, and there has to be this commitment to keep it going, not give up until eventually you see like a mobilization.
Get on the CIA list.
And you get on the CIA list.
That's the target.
Then you're successful.
That's the success.
But believe it or not, that's actually it. I mean, it's the kind of things the CIA and these guys go after, intelligence agencies look at.
Yeah, they do.
They keep an eye on everyone.
for us.
They have their fingers in every pie.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's really interesting. But anyway, if you guys want to help with this, we could. Brother Khalis is kind of, it's his remit, and he does need the help, and it's really difficult to get volunteers who consistently stay engaged. We get volunteers all the time, but you get them for a few months and then they get a promotion. They don't have any more time. But we need to, the whole thing about this is, the reason why I think this will work, if we can get it off the ground, is that because it's by design, it's enabling. It's to do with empowering other people, and to template things based on a simple narrative. And there is an institution behind it that can supply the knowledge aspect. So now if people need to learn their fiqh, they've got somewhere to go. They need to learn their fiqh, they've got somewhere to go, and so on. I think it will work. And it substantially contributes to the sustainability and growth of the institution, to the point that if a group in a particular postcode becomes so good at what they do, they can set up a madrasa locally, they could set up a branch of the college locally and things like that, simply because of how good they've become. Does that make sense? And the models already exist.
Yeah.
So we already have on our own, off our own back, EC already runs 8 or 9 madrasas across London.
I should do.
I think it's 8 or 9. Yeah, something like that. So we EC runs madrasas in Enfield, Edmonton, Camden, Barking, Guildford. Believe it or not.
Yeah. I see that it's a bit, it's not affiliated really closely
With EC,
Grand College.
yeah, it's deliberate.
Okay.
You connect too many things, you end up with problems. So we're actually formally trying to, all these days we've been kind of in the PR, we've been trying to separate. And now we're trying to formally separate them into two completely independent corporate and charity entities.
What's the headquarters for Rashida?
At the moment, it's upstairs in room 1. Yeah. So, I mean, that might still be the case. I mean, they might still use office space here. But it's not a separate entity, it's not a separate company, it's not a separate organization, it's not a separate charity. That's what we're going through now. So that means that it has to have its own, it actually already has its own bank account, but it has to have its own board of trustees and then its own management structure and everything. So it is completely independent entity. Makes sense? Because it is massive. I mean, it's a big entity. It's as big as EC. I mean, it's in terms of, it's bigger than EC in terms of spread. It's not quite, from a budget, from a financial point of view, it's not quite as big, but it's not small. It's substantial. It's probably the biggest chain of madrasas in the country, perhaps in the whole of Europe. So, but we try not to say too much about it, because PR can be a burden sometimes. When everybody's talking about something you're doing, it can be a distraction. Right? And we've got all sorts of other things to worry about. All right? If there's nothing else, we can go on. Nothing. I mean, just bring what you have. Just we need time and energy. Initially, whatever you can give, and there is a critical mass issue. So the more volunteers we have, the more activities happen, the less work it is for each individual. At the moment, we get individual people coming in doing individual things. For example, we have a volunteer who helps organize some of our seminars and is trying to get seminars into other towns. You know, the weekend courses. That's what seminars are. But what I would like to move towards is we have students who volunteer, full-time students who volunteer. What I want to move towards is teams of volunteers taking care of things that, by their very nature, create a kind of cycle of greater engagement, more people getting involved, and so on. And the strategy we had for that was this postcode one. There's a whole, if you ever got involved, you see it. There's an engagement strategy, and it has a list of things that we want to do to get everything off the ground. And this halaqah was a part of it. So a few things that we managed to get going have been the halaqah. The convention that we had was part of the engagement strategy. We've incorporated the termly meetings that I have with part-time course students into that. I need to delegate that to somebody now that I'm on sabbatical. And so on. So and there's a whole bunch of other things that we haven't yet been able to do because of lack of resources, but we want to get to. The newsletter was a part of it, so we managed to get that successfully going. But what we would like to do is do a once a term gathering, a big event, get this postcode thing going so that things start to happen in lots and lots of different areas, and we can then help resource that by getting more faculty members involved. So more of the ulama that teach here, get them more involved, because some of them might already be in some of the areas that students are active in. So the students then end up using their teachers for their localities. Does that make sense? So the way I look at it, and I've looked at it like this for a long time, the way I look at it is I see the institution as a resource, and the strategy is to try to see how that resource can be better utilized by the community, so that like it's super efficient and everything's being used to the absolute maximum, that you're rinsing every single drop out of the institution, because in a way that's what we owe to the community, because the community supports it. Does that make sense? We get lots and lots of waste. The community pumps money into a masjid, and if you were to do an efficiency analysis, like 70% of what the community pays for is waste. The building is empty most of the time. There's hardly any activities. The money gets saved instead of spent. I mean, like the average masjid, their annual reports will say, we've saved £20,000. And they celebrate that. And I always say, actually, unless that is your budgeted reserve, right? That's failure. Because that's how any other entity would do it. They'd say, we give you £20,000 worth of funding, why don't you spend it? And it means it's a sign of your own incompetence if you don't spend it. But our masajid celebrate saving people's donations. Doesn't make any sense. It's like, for nothing. Maybe if we need an extension one day, if we need we might in the next 2 years do a new wudu khana. Exactly. But people don't value, as a community, we haven't yet matured enough to value spending money on activities. Does that make sense? So it's like you say £20,000. Actually, £20,000 in my head, I'm thinking £20,000 is, depending on the complexity of the event, is potentially 40 events, right? Men, women, children. It's potentially, it's potentially like 3/4 of a teacher. It's potentially a dawah initiative. It's potentially a magazine. It's potentially so many things, a book club, all sorts of things, right? It's potentially a counseling service if it's regular. So, but instead of spending that money, finding ways to spend that money, the money gets it gets saved, or they it gets spent on a completely unnecessary extension or a completely unnecessary rebuild or a minaret or a dome. Bricklaying masjid, I hope nobody from Bricklaying masjid is watching this, but Bricklaying masjid, for example, I heard that they spent £1 million on aesthetics. £1 million on aesthetics. There's a masjid in Leicester that did a £5 million refurb, £5 million refurb, and with no increase in space. No increase in space. It was all aesthetics, just making the place just look nicer. And to me, this is precisely what the Prophet ﷺ warned about and mentioned as one of the signs of the end of time: the excessive adornment of masjids. I mean, this room is about as far as a masjid should go in terms of adornment. There's no need for anything more than this. Do you understand? But we get our people just go over the top. Right? It's crazy. £5 million. Give me £5 million. I'm telling you, that I'd change the landscape. With Allah's tawfiq, of course. All right, let's call it a day, inshallah. What time does Maghrib start? Couple of minutes, yeah. Okay. Can you see at the bottom there? It says stop streaming. You see it?
Yeah.
Can you just press that? I don't even know if anyone's watching today, but I can see one person at the beginning. Okay, next.